Hello, everyone. Welcome back from break. We are just waiting on Vicky to rejoin. Here she is, just in the nick of time. Having so many technical difficulties today. Sorry about that, but we got it going. So great to see you again, Vicky, and thank you so much for joining us. We are coming back from break, so we just had a 5-minute break. We had a great presentation on gender budgeting, and so now we will roll right in. This is our first breakout session or action summit that we are having as first action breakout, I guess I should say, that we're having in this action summit. This is our econ policy breakout. We are joined here by Vicki Meath. She's the executive director of Just Economics. She comes to Just Economics with a background in community organizing. She's worked on environmental, social, and economic justice issues ranging from responsible oil and gas drilling to protecting health and human services in the Ohio state budget, which is really relevant because we will be going into climate change next week and then health security right after that. So thanks for kicking us off here. In 2006, Vicki worked with Let Justice Roll and Cleveland Jobs with Justice on the successful campaign to raise the state minimum wage and continued to work with Jobs with Justice on the Cuyahoga County Living Wage Campaign and other worker justice issues. We just heard from Adam Shaw, who's the National Policy Director of Jobs with Justice, for those of you who were with us earlier this morning. So Vicki has a strong commitment to and passion for economic justice work. And she resides here in North Carolina. I'm in North Carolina, in West Asheville, Western Asheville. So without further ado, we will go ahead and let you, Vicki, let you kick it off, and I'll come off screen.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here. Today, I'm going to be telling you just real quickly a little bit more about myself and the organization that I work for. And then we're going to talk about some policy and some ways to, get that policy up and moving. And then I'll have some time for some questions. So again, my name is Vicki Meath. I work for Just Economics. We're a small organization over here in Western North Carolina. And my background is really in grassroots community organizing that has led to some policy change. I am not a professional lobbyist. I have never been. I've never been a legislator. So this is my perspective from a grassroots point of view. And I think it's important to understand that. I do have lots of experience kind of working on policy issues. So I'm excited to talk with y'all today about that. As far as my work with Just Economics, we have led several policy campaigns. Locally, we've led some work on living wages and transit, and some work around our city and county budget. At the state level, we've mostly worked in coalitions, and we have worked, one of the coalitions we work with is called NC Families Care. It's a coalition working on things like living wage, minimum wage, paid family leave, paid sick days at the state level over here in North Carolina. And you'll hear a little bit more about from one of our partners in my slides presentation on some of the work that we're doing in North Carolina through the NC Families Care Coalition. So as far as, I'm just going to back up and give you a little bit of background on Just Economics. Like I said, we're a small organization. We have a small staff. We're working in Western North Carolina. We primarily work in Buncombe County, which is the most populated county in Western North Carolina, west of Charlotte. But we also work in some of our rural communities, including Transylvania County. Our mission at Just Economics is to educate, advocate, and organize for a more just and sustainable local economy that works for all in Western North Carolina, because we know that our current economy doesn't work for everyone. And We focus on three primary kind of issue areas. The first of which is what I'm going to talk more about today when we start talking about policy in just a minute, is living wages and worker justice issues. So I'm going to talk more about that, but that's what we're rooted in. We started off as the Asheville Buncombe Living Wage Campaign, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. That's our first kind of primary issue. Our second primary issue is transit. We work with people who ride the bus out of necessity, who wanted to make some changes to the transit system, some extremely poor individuals and people that lived in communities that were often overlooked in many ways, and we've organized and made some big movement on transit. And then we also work on affordable housing. In our state, in North Carolina, there's some significant challenges to working on affordable housing at the local level because of statewide policy, but we are in an affordable housing crisis here in Asheville and Buncombe County. And so that is certainly one of our lead issues, trying to figure out how to work on that. We take a multi-pronged approach to our work. So we work in the public sector through our public policy work. So we're definitely rooted in public policy. We also work with the private sector, the private business sector. We have a living wage certification program, how we intersect with businesses. And then, of course, we believe that the best community change comes about when the people most impacted by the problems are involved and engaged in the solutions. And so we are committed to grassroots organizing and centering the voice of people most impacted. So I'm going to talk just for a minute, and then I'll get into a slides presentation here in just a second, start talking about policy. But I want to tell you a little bit more about how we have worked on living wage policy. So we, like I said, we started off as the Asheville Buncombe Living Wage Campaign and working to pass a policy in the city of Asheville that required them to pay a living wage to their employers. Here in North Carolina, we have a preemption in our Constitution, so we can't pass a citywide minimum wage that's higher than the state, like they've done in other states around the country. So we started working to make sure that the people that work for the city and the county were paying a living wage. We passed the first part of our living wage policy with the city of Asheville all the way back in 2007. And like I said, we also kind of take this multi-pronged approach, trying to talk about these issues from different angles. And we know that our policy that impacted municipal employees with the city of Asheville only impacts a finite number of employees. So we said, how can we reach more employees? And we started a voluntary living wage employer certification program modeled after one in Ithaca, New York, and launched that in 2008. Like I said, we also believe that the best community change comes about when people most impacted are centered and help leading this work. So we've done a lot of community education work in trying to educate people who haven't had to live on a low income about what that's like and why you should care that your neighbor makes a living wage, even if you're already making a living wage, as well as organizing directly with people that are living on a low income and low wage workers. So we've also worked then kind of throughout this time period. So we've been working on policy, we've been working on our certification program with businesses, and then working on community education and grassroots organizing. We've also worked to strengthen our policy. Once we passed this policy with the city of Asheville in 2007, we worked to strengthen that to include more workers, make sure all of the workers, including part-time workers, make sure there was an adjustment built into the policy. And we've been working on strengthening that policy and expanding. So we've also been working at other local policies in surrounding municipalities and counties. And then we are working in a statewide coalition called Raising Wages NC to raise the state minimum wage. So that's a little bit more about how we've worked on living wage, minimum wage, taking this multi-pronged approach to this particular issue. I'm going to share my screen here in just a moment and talk a little bit more about some workplace policies, and we'll get into what y'all can do. Okay, 1 second. Okay. So, like I said, workplace policies, living wages, this is a big part of the work that we do. We are at a period in our history in this nation where we have some of the greatest income inequality since leading into the Great Depression. We also have seen workers' rights be under attack for decades. And so, I believe that working on workplace policy and working to impact the drastic income inequality that we have in this country is essential to reducing poverty and central to so many issues that we have in our community. Some workplace policies that we've worked on and that I'm going to touch on real quick. I'm going to focus most of my attention on minimum wage and living wage policy, but I'm going to kind of speed through some work on some other policies and give you some examples of what's happening at a federal level and at different state levels on things like fair and flexible scheduling, sick days, paid family leave, pregnancy accommodations, the right to organize in the workplace, and some other policies. I'm going to share with y'all this link to the slides presentation. So some of the stuff that I'm cruising through real quick, you'll be able to take a look at if this might be relevant or something that you want to take up in your state. All right, so let's talk about wages for a minute. First of all, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. $7.25 an hour. That means that a full-time worker working 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, never taking a single day off because low-wage workers don't often have access to paid sick days or any other paid time off, makes $15,080 a year before taxes. That is about $1,256 a month before taxes. When you consider taking out taxes, you're at about $1,050 a month, somewhere in there. In Buncombe County, where I live, fair market rent for a one-bedroom apartment is $1,100 a month. So that means that if you were working full-time, 40 hours a week, and remember, most low-wage workers can't get full-time because they're 40 hours, maybe they get 38, 39, but their employer doesn't want them to, heaven forbid, have to pay overtime. So, but if you were working full-time, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, without taking a single day off, in Buncombe County, you couldn't even afford rent for a one-bedroom apartment if you had no other expenses, no food, transportation, healthcare, nothing. So, this is an issue close to my heart. I am a single parent who was working below the poverty line before I started this job. I do have a background in community organizing, but circumstances are what they are, and I found myself working waiting tables, living below the poverty line, and then also kind of bumping up against this, like making too much money to qualify for certain types of assistance, not enough to meet my basic needs. And so this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. Minimum wage at the federal level has stayed the same, this measly $7.25 an hour for 12 long years. This is the longest period in the history of the minimum wage that has gone without a raise. The minimum wage from 1968 would be worth over $12 an hour today in today's dollars. I think we should be doing better for the next generation, not taking steps backwards. And it's important to note that an increase in the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2025 would raise wages for 32 million American workers. So this is why this is an important policy, I think, at the state and the federal level. Wherever we can get this done, it's important to move this forward. All right. Talk a little bit about some minimum wage policies and some details, and then we're going to get into the how and how y'all can get this going in your states. So real quick, there are 29 other states that have a higher minimum wage than the federal, $7.25. And it's important to consider. So it's, first of all, we need to know if your state is already there. If your state already has a higher minimum wage than the federal, there might be some also aspects of your minimum wage bill that needs to be improved. But these are some aspects of a bill that you need to consider: is what's the wage rate and the timeline for impacting that wage. We've seen obviously a big movement thanks to friends and colleagues and workers all over the country who are working for Fight for 15 and Raise Up to set $15 an hour as a better wage floor. But the federal bill doesn't get that to 2025, and at that point, will that be enough? But what's the wage rate and timeline? Certainly an aspect of the bill that we want to make sure you have identified. When and how are adjustments happening in the bill? Are you adjusting according to the CPI annually? Are there some built-in adjustments that are going to help lead to a higher minimum wage at some point? The sub-minimum wage, this is the minimum wage for tipped employees. And so tipped employees are still at a minimum wage of $2.13 an hour. They're supposed to be making minimum wage when you include tips in that. But many workers aren't there yet. But there are some states that have phased out and gotten rid of the sub-minimum wage. The sub-minimum wage was created at a time where certainly there was racial bias and other reasons for creating a sub-minimum wage. So it's something to consider if you want to try to eliminate the sub-minimum wage. Also, exemptions. There are some workers that have been exempt from a minimum wage, some domestic workers, farm workers. Can we get rid of some of those exemptions? So these are all aspects of the bill that when you're thinking about whether you want to propose or lead or support a bill around a minimum wage raise in your state, what do you want to do about these things and make sure that those get worked out? There's a couple of other policies related to wages. First of all, like I mentioned earlier, in North Carolina, preemption is worked into our state constitution, so we can't pass a citywide minimum wage that's higher than our state. We've also had, you can also raise the wages for state employees. That might be a step on the pathway to raising a state minimum wage. And then state contracts. Can you set a higher minimum wage for contracts or any business that is getting any type of economic incentives? Can you set a higher wage for those employees? So lots of things to consider when you're thinking about proposing, leading, supporting, or sponsoring a minimum wage policy in your state. I'm going to speed through a couple of other policies. There's fair and flexible scheduling. There's a bill that's been filed at the federal level that would curb abusive scheduling practices and protect workers in different ways, like protecting workers who ask for a schedule change, provide incentives for predictable and stable schedules, and guaranteeing workers the right to rest between shifts. Again, I will put the link in the chat here in a little bit to the slides presentation. So if you want to kind of look into a little bit some of these things more, because I'm going to speed through this section. There has been some state and local actions on fair and flexible scheduling. So DC and California, for example, have laws requiring additional pay for employees forced to work a split shift. There's different policies in that you can kind of see. Vermont and San Francisco have, and 8 states have laws guaranteeing a minimum amount of pay for workers who are called into work and sent home early. You can take a look at some of these policies. Another policy that impacts workers, if your state already has a higher minimum wage and that's not a thing that you need to be working on. Another important policy is paid sick days. So at the federal level, we have the Healthy Families Act. And we have several states, 13 states in the District of Columbia that have statewide paid sick days laws. Also paid leave, paid family leave. This is something that, we're hoping, advocates are really hoping that there's going to be some movement at the federal level on paid family leave through this reconciliation policy, but not sure if that is going to happen. We are one of 2 countries in the whole world without some type of nationwide paid family leave policy. We obviously have FMLA, and FMLA was an important federal policy, but it doesn't cover everyone, and it's for unpaid leave. We need paid family leave in this country. We need paid family leave that's accessible, meaningful, affordable, and inclusive. There is some work on paid family leave that's happening at the federal level, like I said, and there are several states that have paid family leave insurance programs, and some that are coming on soon. Pregnancy accommodations, pregnancy worker fairness is another type of policy. There's some policies at the federal level and some stuff that is happening at the state level. Again, speeding through this because I really want to get back to minimum wage and how you can move these things forward. But I will share the slides presentation. And then there's other policies, certainly the right for workers to organize in their workplace. That's been under attack for a long time. And the Federal PRO Act is something that would remove barriers to worker organizing. There's policies that would expand childcare, equal pay, and non-discrimination policy. So several different types of policies. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Moms Rising. They're part of the NC Families Care Coalition that has helped put this slides presentation together. They're doing a lot of important federal and state work in many places, including here in North Carolina, on things like paid family leave and paid sick days and living wages. All right, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to drop in the chat the link to this slides presentation. Give me 1 second. And I'm going to transition to talking a little bit more about how you can get some of this done, and then we'll get to your questions and more of a discussion in just a minute. So some actions, these are my thoughts. Again, my perspective does not come from a professional lobbyist perspective or any experience as a legislator, but it comes from a perspective of working on policies, local policies and state policies from a grassroots level and with coalitions. That being said, I believe there's some important things to remember and steps to take when you're trying to figure out if you're going to pursue a policy. So if you are interested in taking the lead or joining together with others who are taking the lead on proposing some policy in your state around workplace practices like raising the minimum wage, The first thing that I believe that needs to happen is you need to connect with grassroots and advocacy groups. There are likely groups, no matter what state you come from, that are working on these types of issues and interested in this policy. So, for example, in North Carolina, Raising Wages NC is a statewide coalition that's been working to raise the minimum wage. And that includes advocacy organizations like the North Carolina Justice Center and the Center for Responsible Lending, as well as grassroots groups like Just Economics, like Raise Up, which is an offshoot of Fight for 15, like the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And we also have labor. The North Carolina AFL-CIO is a part of that. And I always am appreciative of labor being such an important piece of raising the minimum wage, because most people that belong to a union are actually making above, the whatever the proposed minimum wage is. But I think it's important to remember that labor is always standing in solidarity with workers that are at the bottom and kind of raising the wage floor. So I think it's important to connect with people that have already been working in your state on these issues, see where they are. And then second, I think it's important to identify allies within the legislature, as well as is there a history in your state of raising the minimum wage, for example? Is there a history of work on this issue in this state? If so, who and how has this happened? Learn as much possible about past activity on this issue. If not, are there related efforts, and who's led them or co-sponsored them? Do you have relationships with people who have led, co-sponsored, or supported these issues? So first up, I think kind of connecting with grassroots advocacy groups. And real quick, I actually want to go back to that for 1 second and make this point. I think it's also important to make sure that you're respecting the needs of those grassroots groups. As well, Just Economics, for example, is a 501c3. We don't support or oppose any political party or candidate. And so it's important when we're working with legislators that they don't come to a rally or something about the minimum wage and then, stump for the Democrats or talk about their party. For us, we could lose our tax exempt status, and we hold that sacred. And we really, so it's important when you're working with grassroots groups to make sure that you're honoring what they need to continue this work and honoring the history that they have in kind of raising awareness about these issues. So connect with grassroots groups and advocacy groups working on this, identify allies and folks within the legislature, and learn the history of this issue. And then kind of work with those allies and the grassroots and advocacy groups to figure out the details of the bill. This is the devil's in the details, right? So figuring out if we're talking about minimum wage, like I said, where, what's the wage rate and the timeline? And can we come to some agreement? There might be some places that we need to compromise. Are we getting rid of exemptions? What are we doing about the tipped or sub minimum wage? So that part can take a while. It can take some time to kind of sort through that and factor in what we think is feasible given the makeup of and landscape of our state legislature, as well as where are the lines that we have to hold? Where are the places that we have to make sure that we're honoring our constituents, we're honoring the history of work on these issues in our state. And then for us, what we typically do is we do some power mapping. And I think it's important for y'all to do kind of that power mapping as well, like learning about and make sure that you have a good understanding of who your allies and opponents are in leadership on certain committees, and who are the allies and opponents outside of the legislature. and who influences those those individuals. And so again, I'm not my background is not in lobbying, and my background is not in as a legislator. So this is just my take on at a grassroots perspective. We're always looking at, are there people, who can we talk to, and if there are people that are opposed to us, to our issue, how can we talk to them and reach them? Are there places that we can meet them on some center place where we agree on some aspects of this? And then certainly just kind of working to build power before we're actually filing the bill and moving forward. A lot of times after filing, things are going to move quickly, but I believe that it's important to build power kind of leading up to even bill drafting or bill filing, and building power within the legislature and building power outside, building power with leaning on those grassroots and advocacy groups, and the organizations and leaders across your state who have been working on these issues for a long time, honoring that history and that work, and building relationships there. So that's kind of where I see kind of steps to take action. And I think, again, that these issues, worker justice issues, raising the minimum wage, impacting income inequality, other issues related to paid sick days, paid family leave, these are important, essential issues to positively impact the workplace and the experience as a worker in this country, as well as where things are with economic inequality. All right, so I am going to now open it up for questions. If you've already asked a question, I do see one in here, so I'm going to read this here in just a second. And but feel free to put your questions in the chat and let's just have a conversation. This is my first time using this platform, so hopefully this works out. But yeah, we'll just answer some questions, and then we'll close out today with kind of talking about next steps. Where do you want to go from here? Are you interested in kind of moving some work forward in your state? All right, so this question is for newer legislators. What are the best ways to find and connect with grassroots advocates working on these issues in our states? That is a great question. I think that first of all, just doing some initial kind of like research online, but I also think asking around. If there is a legislator at the state level that you know of that has been in the legislature longer than you, asking them, like, what groups do you align with? What groups do you get some support in terms of research, in terms of helping to guide your policy directions. So, I think that you can kind of learn a lot from someone else in the legislature who has a voting record that is, similar to how you see your voting record being, and asking them who do they work with, who do they reach out to, and then reaching out to that organization, reaching out to that executive director, and sitting down and listening. Like, what are you working on? What is most important to you? And then are there, is the minimum wage something that you have capacity to work on? Is that something that you're interested in? We have a great relationship with much of our delegation here in Buncombe County, and kind of work hand in hand. And so I think it's important to build those relationships and continue to make sure that you're connecting with your constituents through organizations that they support or that they're a part of and that are active in your community. All right, next question. Do you recommend any books or resources to refer to as legislators and grassroots advocate promote these issues? That is a great question. And I certainly think there are lots of books. I'm tending to read a lot more nerdier policy stuff, but there's books like Nickeled and Dimed, for example, that talks about why we need to raise the minimum wage, and what it's like to live on a low income. So yeah, I'm trying to think of like what's not super super nerdy in the weeds, and what's a little bit more fun to read. So there's yeah, I'm not sure I have the best recommendations there, but that's a great question. I think that's another great question to ask a senior member of your delegation, is that might be doing some work on these issues. And also other organizations that are working in your state. If I think that's a great question, I'm just not sure I have the best answer to that. All right. Next question was about our living wage certification program and incentivizing other employers to provide a living wage. Yeah, great. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we're doing at a local level. I kind of sped through some of this in the beginning. So we have a voluntary living wage employer certification program that the reason that we implemented this program, right, was because we don't have the legal ability to pass a citywide minimum wage, like they have done in Seattle and San Francisco and many other places across the country. Here in North Carolina, our state preemption prevents us from doing that. And so we looked at this program out of Ithaca, New York, and our friends at the Tompkins Worker Center that voluntarily encourages employers to raise their wages to a living wage, so everybody makes at least a living wage, a more just minimum than the minimum wage. Here in Asheville, our living wage is $17.30, so it's more than $10 more than the minimum wage. And this is just the bare minimum of what you need to put a roof over your head and food on your table here in Buncombe County. And so we certify employers that voluntarily choose to do that. And we try to encourage consumers to support those employers. We've encouraged more than raises of more than $4 million a year because of employers that have raised their wages to come up to our standards. And this was like a creative solution to a problem. We certainly are also, like I said, working on the state campaign to raise the minimum wage. And we believe that kind of policy and some of these other creative solutions can work together. It does incentivize employers to provide a living wage, and we have lots of both anecdotal data and other data to show that employers that pay better save money in retention and keep employees longer, save money in training and development, recruitment, all of those things. So we have lots of businesses that also understand the important aspects of why it's important to pay a minimum, a living wage. And then those businesses are also active in our statewide campaign, or several of them are active in our statewide campaign to raise the minimum wage. Because from a business perspective, it also makes a lot more sense. If one person is able to work one job 40 hours a week and be able to afford their basic needs, Instead of working, 60, 70, 80 hours a week just to put a roof over their head, when that person comes into work, if they're just working one job, they're able to be more productive. They're able to be healthier. There's all of these, social determinants of health that are better when people are making a living wage. And so certainly we have lots of business owners that understand that and are able to also engage in this program and then help to impact public policy and talk from a business owner's perspective of why raising the minimum wage is important. All right. Next question was, are there spaces in the state budget we should particularly look at that could be redirected towards these priorities? Often we hear, well, we need to pay for this somehow. How do we answer these questions of how to pay for these programs? That's great. We also do a lot of work on city, county, state, and federal budgets. And I often believe there are places in state budgets. I also think when we're looking at state budgets, we're looking at, both income and expenses, right? And, certainly that also means your taxation system. Like, is how you're taxing people in your state, people, corporations, is that fair, just, equitable? Is that, and is it paying for all the supports that we need to provide in our communities? And so, so I often do find that there are places in budgets where we can reduce some spending, but I think it's also important to kind of look at the other side, the income side, and say, how are we raising money in our states? Is this leading to the type of community that we want to live in? And are there things that need to change about how we tax or what fees we create? Also, I do want to say that with a lot of the policies that I talked about in workplace policies, that they don't have price tags. They are policies, they're mandating businesses to pay a living wage, so or pay a higher minimum wage, or there is like some of the insurance programs for paid family leave, for example, work a different way. Now, what's happening at the federal level on paid leave would be a budgetary thing. Again, that's a federal policy, but paid sick days, paid family leave insurance programs, raising the minimum wage, pregnancy accommodations in the workplace, many of these don't have a price tag. They're just setting the standard for how we build communities with more just and sustainable workplace practices, and how we can kind of push back against what's happened to workers over the last, 5 decades or so. Great. So as we have just a couple of minutes left, I am also going to put my email address in the chat. And I would welcome you to let me know if you have additional questions. Feel free to reach out to me. Again, I'm not a professional lobbyist, haven't worked inside the building. This is a grassroots perspective. So I hope that was useful. And then what I would do is challenge y'all to think about, what are your next steps? Are one of these issues near and dear to your heart? Do one of these issues, will they impact your state and your constituents in a way that feels powerful and meaningful for you to do the work to help either sponsor, lead, propose, draft, whatever, a bill in your state? Does your state have a higher minimum wage than the federal, or are you stuck at $7.25 like we are here in North Carolina? And is your minimum wage bill, do you still have a sub-minimum wage for tipped workers? Are you still excluding farm workers and domestic workers? And are these issues that you want to go to bat for and put in the time and and make a difference on. So if they are, I would challenge you to kind of first take a look at what is that policy that you really want to try to move forward, that you're committed to. What else do you need to know about that policy? What books do you need to read? That was a great question. Sorry, my answer wasn't fabulous on that. And who else in your legislature, who else in your what organizations in your state, who has a history of working on these types of issues that you can kind of learn from and work with, and then kind of get moved down that road. So I would challenge you to think about those things and kind of write out your action plan for how you can be a part of moving forward policies that impact workers in the workplace and positively impact your state.
Fantastic. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Vicki.
No, you're good. I was done. I was just kind of mumbling at the end.
No, I thought that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your email. I hope everyone's jotting it down. It's also readily available on the website, which I loved because it made it easy to connect with you. Sometimes it's super hard to connect with the actual people on the ground doing the work. And so it was really fabulous to have you come and teach us exactly what you had done there in Asheville and what you're doing with Just Economics and how legislators can move these kinds of policies forward in their own state houses. So hope that was, well, I know it was useful for me and helpful. I hope our members and legislators are looking to introduce similar policies or support similar policies in your own state house. So I won't keep you any longer, Vicki, or our folks in the audience. Just a reminder, we are having our networking dinner, as we're calling it, but it's our dining around dinner, as you all are probably used to. It's our first one tonight. It's with Amy Pritchard. Join us back here at 6 o'clock. And we'll have her do a conversation about running for higher office and those who are interested in doing that. So thank you, Vicki. We invite you to, I said this before, but still want to say it, enjoy the rest of our program and tune in with us as we move along here throughout the month. So
great. Thank you so much, and good luck to y'all. And thank you for your interest in policies that positively impact working people in your state. Thanks,
Absolutely.
everyone.
Great. Thank you, Vicki. Bye.